DAO attack of 2016, one of the most amazing, complicated, and bizarre heists that I'm aware of. I'm joined by three amazing folks who lived through it. First is Taylor Monahan, who co-founded My Ethereum. Basically, Ethereum had gone live in 2015. That's why we're here for the 5-year anniversary. And all these new projects wanted to where you could, use it to unlock a bike or an apartment and all sorts of stuff. But nobody had any money. So his idea was the DAO. And it was about everybody would pitch in collectively and form this kind of virtual VC fund. So just to take you back to that point, there wasn't a lot going on in Ethereum at that time, between like late 15, early 2016. So I wanted to ask Taylor if she could just kind of tell us what she remembers. You started your project right around this time. It's my understanding that there wasn't, there were wallets and there was exchanges and you could send and, buy and sell crypto, but that was about it. Can you tell us what it was like back then and how you got into it? There wasn't a lot going on. I think the frontier version of Ethereum came out in like February or something after Homestead. So, there was they were building out the product, but again, not a lot of stuff to do with it. So the DAO was supposed to be, it was a means to an end, right? This was not supposed to be really a project. It was supposed to be, hey, let's pool our money, let's vote on cool stuff, and let's get this stuff built. So Griff, give us a sense of what you guys were thinking of at Slockit as 2016 wore on, and you got closer to the time when DAO tokens would go on sale. Like, how were things? How did you? Were you did that optimism Taylor talked about? Did you have that, and how would you say the whole Slockit team had that? Adhere to that as well as an employee at Plucket? Okay. Yeah. So Christoph is pretty much the only person I've ever talked to who didn't buy DAO tokens, and I think that was obviously a big reason why we saw Ether go from around $8 in early 2016 to over $20 on the day of the hack. Um, it just huge demand, and it made the amount of money. I mean, I guess the raise it was at 150 million, and then Ether kept rising. So on the day of the hack, it was worth 250 million, quarter of a billion dollars. Um, there were some holes though in the code, and Gun, you were one of the main people to start checking those out. Can you just take us back to April, May of 2016, and when you guys started going through the code and sort of saying, hey guys, this there might be a problem. different problems, but as I recall, none of those were the actual bug. Peter Vicenis had also uncovered a few. Christian Weitzweider had also, but it's fascinating to me that all these bugs existed seemingly in the code, and nobody got the right one in time. But to just go back, a fun story here, Taylor, you actually were involved. So the way that Solidity works is Christoph released the code and then you have to compile it. And then, so once Christoph released the code, like there were, I don't know, 20 some DAOs or something, some 20 different people compiled the code. And they were like, in the sense of this really distributed systems, decentralized systems, they were like, which one do we use? So they came up with flipping a coin. And Taylor, I think you got the honor of flipping that coin. Sick as a dog trading emails with Phil Diane, where you're like, hey man, I think line 666 has a problem. And that was the bug. And can you just take us to that scene and what you were thinking and how you remember that?
practice. That was it. It was an 8-month-old language. So now there's very clear security practices that are made. I mean, security audits didn't even exist back then. That was not a thing. We got the DAO code audited by the people who audited the client of Ethereum. Okay, it's just they don't know how to use Solidity. Now there's a whole industry around smart contract auditing. There's a whole community around white hat hacking and actually like how to report bugs and report these issues. At the time, I got mad because Goon is like saying, "Hey, I found the bug." I'm like, "Why didn't you tell us?" You know, because then we could have hacked it, which we ended up hacking the DAO ourselves after the other hacker did. But and then to protect the funds, and that was kind of the path forward for the DAO, was just being hacked constantly by a lot of people. So, but line 666, I think it was line 665 needed to be switched with line 667, if I remember right. And so, yeah, you don't forget these things, I guess.
Figure out what was going on and if you could identify who was behind the hack. To this day, we still don't know who the DAO attacker is. Taylor, how did you feel with all that optimism and community, and then this starts happening?
I saw either the Reddit post or like Griff's message linking to the Reddit post on my way up to my friend's cabin, and so literally I saw the post, and then I had no cell service until we made it to the cabin, and I was just sitting there like, what is going on? I think that it was really weird because there was this, just like your stomach just drops out when this happened. Like that day, the next day, like you just have this pit in your stomach that's just like, this is not good. This is really, 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 really bad. And it was pretty like, that pit comes from the helplessness of it too. But pretty quickly, it became obvious that like, even though this terrible event had happened, there were a lot of like things that needed to be done. And so that's where I focused my energy. Like I was like, okay, like let's not be buttholes to each other. The world is watching. And let's see what we can resolve. And we're investigating like the child DAOs and people who had split before and people who had split after. And, there was all these things to be done. And then obviously the decision about the fork had to be discussed. And there was the soft fork versus the hard fork and on and on and on. And so I really don't think that it hit me sort of like the lasting impact of the DAO didn't hit me. I never sold my DAO tokens. Like I've traded some of them, like withdrawn some of them, but I still have to this day DAO tokens because I was like, I might need them to test the interface or something. I know a lot of people like sold immediately or like, they were withdrawing when the price of ETH, went up to 1,000, but like, I don't know. It's weird, right? It's like a delayed reaction. I think I'm still learning from the DAO and the mistakes that were made, or even the mistakes that these unforeseen circumstances that aren't necessarily mistakes. What can be learned?
And something that's really in favor of the Ethereum community is that everybody started coming together and working together to do something about this. Griff, you started that immediately by trying to figure out who was in the identities of people in the child DAOs. And that sort of grew into the effort that became the Robinhood group. In the wider community, like Vitalik and everybody started discussing, soft fork, hard fork options. But Griff, can you kind of take us into what it was like to be on those chats with as the Robinhood group formed. And just for anybody who doesn't know, these are the guys. This was all kind of behind the scenes at the time. I'm not sure many people knew about this, but there were like a group of hackers and coders who were very actively trying to figure out who had done this and to figure out the hack itself. And maybe Griff, you could just kind of take us into what that Friday was like for you.
Fun than the previous 3 weeks. Goon gave me a lot of problems with his moratorium, and we had a lot of banging our head against the wall to try to move the DAO forward. But once the DAO got hacked, it was obvious what we had to do. There were very few choices, so it was clear action. We had to tell everyone first off, and make sure that everyone's aware that this is.
Okay, I can't. Is Griff cutting out? Right.
Script to do it while we started hunting down the curator. There were different people who had roles in these child DAOs that we needed to hunt down, like who made being the person who approves proposals in that DAO. If we can get those keys, and if we can keys in any other future DAOs to make sure that we have control of all the exits, all the possible holes in the DAO. We wanted to a group of trusted Ethereum hackers got together to try to stop the bleeding. And we weren't very successful at stopping the bleeding, honestly. But at one point, it just stopped. Several hours later, the hacker only took about 30% of the DAO of the ether in the DAO, and then just stopped. And we weren't sure exactly why. But we studied the code and we figured out how to hack the DAO. Actually, two different people within our group created two different hack contracts. And so then we started draining the DAO before anyone else figured it out. So the DAO hacker took 30% and we took the other 70% and made sure that we were in control of this ether. The like almost dumb luck security protection of the DAO was that when you pull money out of the DAO, it actually goes into a child DAO. And then that child DAO, it's stuck there for 28 days until the DAO has had its own token creation event. And then after that, you have 14 days to pull money out through a proposal, because there was a proposal time limit. So we had 42 days before the money could get into an account. But for the hard fork, we had 35 days before the hacker could actually split the DAO and move it to another DAO and to a different address. And so we had all sorts of crazy plans. We were going to buy tokens in the dark DAO. We had control of all the curators. And eventually, the reason we actually even started hacking was because we were perfecting our hack contracts to hack the DAO. And then we were waiting for someone else to hack the DAO because we weren't sure of the legal situation if we started hacking. And so we wanted to be sort of pushed into it to hack the DAO. So there were actually probably about 8 or 9 different DAOs.
Point and draw it out. So I think everybody heard the story that Griff just gave, and this is, I think, it captures the true essence of a decentralized system. I think there are a lot of people out there who say all sorts of things about every other chain, calling it, centralized, whatever. And for the case of Ethereum, King Vitalik was a phrase that was used often in that time frame, and Vitalik was reduced to spamming the chain himself. And I remember these discussions that Griff just went through, and look at the convoluted things that he just mentioned. That's what it means to not have control. Even the people who wrote the code are using only those interfaces open to the public to interact with it. So these decentralized systems are amazing, and they have a life of their own. And really, what we had, I think, was a story of robot versus man. Right? Robot's got some kind of issue. It's a weird kind of robot. Doesn't really have physical form, but it's gone haywire, and now you have to take control of it. So I just want to bring that out. It kind of gets lost in the process, but it was not at all a centralized system. It was all a bunch of volunteers trying to do their best.
Thing here is not a lot of people know there were several attacks on the DAO. There wasn't just the one, and Griff just alluded to it. So that Friday contract attack got a lot of ether. That was the main one, about $55 million worth. Then it stopped. The Robinhood group assembled and got their contracts ready, their hack ready. But like I said, they were worried about the legality of pushing the button about hacking this thing themselves. Then on Tuesday, after the attack on June 21st, they didn't have a choice because a second attack began. And it started drawing thousands of ether out of the DAO and became the second biggest hack with about 250,000 ether stolen. So that's when they all jumped into it. And so there's a great backstory. Just again, the community, what the Robinhood group needed was a lot of DAO tokens. The more DAO tokens you had, the quicker you could drain the DAO. So they all pooled their resources. They had about 600,000. Then they got in touch with Ryan Zurer and some others, and soon they had millions of DAO tokens because everyone in the community was like, yeah, of course I'll help. And once they had that, I think, Griff, you said to me that you were pulling out 1 million ETH at a time, and it only took a couple of hours to drain that 70%, which is amazing. And so, but one thing that I just real quickly interject here is that attacker on the 21st, he got mad at you guys and sent an encrypted message to you once the idea of like a soft fork or a hard fork was really coalescing. And it was from an account that was initiated the second attack. And he wrote to you guys in the Robinhood group, and somebody shared this unencrypted message with me. I don't think there are many people in the world who have ever seen this outside of you guys, Griff. But so I'll read it, and I think just real quick, the syntax is weird. It might be on purpose. We're not sure, but it says, "This soft fork and the DAO wars situation is waste of time for everyone. I'm supporting the idea that code is law at smart contract, but also the network consensus is law on blockchain." So then he talks about his dark child DAO, and he says, "I will basically give this DAO money back to the curator if Ethereum, if you guys do it too." And he says, "Don't you do it also to see productive future?" So you guys were getting under his skin. I guess they expected to get away with it, but that wasn't the case. And then maybe real quick, we just jump to Gun. You in a couple of weeks' time, you were hosting your coding camp at Cornell, and the fork was approaching. And basically, real short story short, the hard fork was the only option. Basically, it had been the consensus at this point. But maybe you could take us through that.
Happened in that time frame. So first of all, there was the big discussion around, do we fork or not? And that came down to, is code law, or do these systems serve human purposes? And that was a really interesting discussion. And for me, the high point of this was, there was a group of us at Cornell, Vitalik, Vlad, Alex Van de Sand, and Martin Beze. We were all sitting around, and I remember looking at them and saying, "Look, guys, if you are going after the dark money flows, then you cannot fork, right? If your goal is to go after illegal, illicit flows, then you have to just obey stuff. And it's okay. I'm not a judgmental person. If that's what you're doing, that's fine. But if you really want to go after this world computer thing, then if you really mean that, then you can totally fork. So which one is it?" And without thinking, without a millisecond, everyone said it's the latter. It is not the case that we want to be, we are not trying to be the Bitcoin of the world. We're not trying to go after these darker money flows. We're not trying to be da da da. We have a different mission. And so that was a very interesting moment for me. Fast forward a tiny bit, the plan was use a soft fork to freeze and then a hard fork to take back the funds. And life was kind of going according to plan. Soft fork code had been written and approved by a bunch of people, and I received an email from someone, from a high school student. And this was a student I had corresponded with about a year ago. And he wrote a very nice message. He said, well, in the fall, I wrote to you about which schools to apply to. I applied to Cornell. I got in. I'm going to be a freshman at Cornell. But by the way, I have been thinking about the fork situation. And isn't it the case that if they actually apply the soft fork patch, then it's going to open a giant denial of service attack on Ethereum itself? And this was an amazing discovery. It was new to me as well. So I co-authored a blog post with a high school student and his other friend, who was a freshman at Columbia University at the time. So these are my youngest collaborators, by the way. And we wrote something that says, hey, soft fork is actually a DOS attack vector. And it turns out that Ethereum is quite censorship resistant because the types of things that you can do in other blockchains are much harder to do in Ethereum because of its Turing complete nature. You have to execute stuff. And if you want to censor things, well, you will have executed things and you will then have to toss them out if you want to censor. And that can be very costly for people who want to do that. So we wrote a blog post to this effect. It had a mixed series of reactions. The value of Ethereum at the time was about 1B, and this was unexpected, and it was a reversal of the Ethereum high brass, if you will, because everybody thought this was doable. And so the value of Ether dropped by about 10%. So it was a $100 million blog post, is what we called it internally. And I wrote a message saying, hey, Vitalik, sorry about this. And he wrote back, no. To the contrary, it preserved 900M. So it's really a $900 million blog post as opposed to a minus 100. So soft fork was taken off the table. And then there was a big discussion around the hard fork. And that was a community-led discussion.
Look, that it surprised me that looking back on it, obviously you guys could have assumed that everybody, the way that the hard fork was implemented was an update to the software. Pretty much everybody had to update. You could assume that maybe everyone would 100%, but why assume that? And why, that there was one mining pool in China that didn't update, so they kept mining on the old chain, and that's where we get Ether Classic from. And it seems like to me that maybe Ethereum is, I think, a lot of nice people, a lot of really good intentions, but maybe that gets in their way sometimes. And here they could have been a little more battle hardened. I just wondered if anybody has a thought on that, and whether the fork should it have been more expected, and should people have thought more about what to do if this happens?
Just a fairly universally held sort of like thought, right? Was the theory that the longest chain wins. That was it. It's been around forever. That's what everyone thought. And so if you look back at the conversations happening on the forums and on Reddit, that was just reiterated again and again and again. Like, even if it forks, the longest chain will win. And it's really hard to take yourself back to that time, because today it's so obvious that, both chains can totally exist. And why wouldn't they exist if it gives you free money, right? It's so obvious. Why didn't we see it back then? I mean, someone saw it, right? Because it didn't, even though there was this one mining pool that was mining it, which, by the way, happens usually every single fork, contentious or not. There's always someone who forgets to update or just doesn't update. But what gave Ethereum Classic its initial value, what gave the two chains, each of them having value, was, I think, when Poloniex listed it, which was a couple days later. And so, should people have seen it coming? Yeah, because if we think about the incentives, any number of people who held a massive amount of Ethereum at the time were incentivized to create free money out of thin air via this fork. And it is what it is. I think that's another lesson to be learned, is like, the second you're certain about something, you should be less certain.
Frontier still exists, so who cares? But then when Polo listed it, it's like, wow, that's gonna get ugly, and just watch people dump. But then the amazing thing was that people were buying it, and then we saw I kind of saw was like Bitcoiners wanted to maintain, or my theory on it is that Bitcoiners believed in the code is law theory, and that actually this Ethereum is better than that Ethereum, so it will win in the long run. And there became a community there. And Goon, I see you shaking your head. I feel like you got something to say.
Exactly right. I was just shaking my head at the sentiment that was expressed. I've always been against that. These monetary systems only have value to the extent they serve people. Code is not law. Code is buggy. Law is law, and that's where we are. That's why we are here today. But one of the things that I guess I could add to this is what happened when we were sitting around, again with the same crew, and Vitalik was reading his email, looked up and said, "Oh, look at this! I got a message." And I'm not going to name the developer, but everybody will know, from a prominent Bitcoin Core developer, one who's famous mostly for his social manipulation. I think it was just sad but true. And he said, "Look, here is this person trying to buy my coins on the old chain." And we all looked at each other and said, "That's really strange." And of all people to try to buy Vitalik's coins, we it was very clear that this was an overt act of slapping someone in the face with a glove to say, I and a bunch of people that are coordinating with me are trying to create value behind the old chain. And it really was, I think, Griff, you were right. It really was a Bitcoin versus Ethereum kind of a mentality clash. It was very much a culture clash. So for Bitcoin and its purpose in life, code must be law. Bitcoin cannot do these kinds of things, although it did in its history as well. It did all sorts of funny things to back its way out of bugs. And but the Bitcoiners felt that nobody else could, right? That the latecomers had to be held to a higher standard, and that they also felt that the latecomers had to actually uphold their values. They did not appreciate the difference between Ethereum and Bitcoin. And I think even to this day they don't. They think that these systems are diametrically opposed. They think that they're playing for the same market. They don't understand that these systems actually have different value propositions and different domains that they're targeting. So that was, I think, one of the things I learned there. And so this really was, that message was really a slap in the face, and was, okay, we're going to put some synthetic value in here, and we will see what kind of a community we can develop. And
The Slockit Slack, or the DAO Slack, which originally was the Slockit Slack, it was for 3 days. It was fine after the hack. People were having coherent discussions and everything was great. And then thousands of random people came in and just started spamming all sorts of hate and saying things are going wrong and da da da. And all of a sudden, they just came in like 3 days after the hack and flooded all of our communication channels and started effectively ruining any kind of culture that we could maintain. And I found out later about this thing called the Dragon's Den, which I'm pretty sure was activated to attack the DAO community and the Ethereum community and make the most of this misfortune. It sounds like Goon agrees.
whose community was born out of the DAO really matter 5 years later? Are there any lessons about community decisions from the DAO Bitcoin can learn?
Own chain, and they can have their own values. And if I'm gonna create a dark market, I'm gonna do it on Ethereum Classic, and that's great. I really hope that all these chains just get bridged to each other, and every community can control their own destiny.
Like I would say maybe late 2017 and in the last couple of years have managed to add some unique value, specifically with some of the hardcore FOSS projects, like free open source projects that weren't finding funding or money with Ethereum. Like they were able to build stuff for quote unquote Ethereum Classic, which then can be used to grow the Ethereum community or platform or whatever. So that's really, really interesting because that's weird, right? Like it should be the other way around. I think it also serves as a good reminder of obviously what happened and that different philosophies do exist. And that if you don't like what the law is in this new decentralized world, you can fork out.
Well, Taylor, why don't you take this and what lessons should be learned, what have been learned, and what should be learned still about this, and if there is a new wave of decentralized applications coming out.
But I think the biggest lessons that we've learned can be applied to like all smart contracts or any code anywhere. Like the biggest lessons that I've taken away is like the unexpected can and will happen. Even if you have literally all the smartest guys in the room looking at the code, writing the code, auditing the code, things can slip by. This is a really, really new ecosystem. And even though we've evolved a lot since the DAO, there's still gaping holes that nobody has thought about, especially when we think about the interoperability between all these different components of the system. And so if you're building a DAO or the LAO or writing code anywhere, where it's dealing with an immense amount of money, an immense amount of, individual people's money, you should be aware of the consequences and perhaps consider putting in some mechanisms to, like a big old button to say pause, in the cases that something goes wrong, because I can assure you that things will go wrong. Even if you are the best coder in the world, like they will go wrong. And when the incentives are so high for malicious actors to attack something, they'll go wrong way more quickly than you think.
One of the great things that came out of the DAO was the renewed interest in formal verification. So that has been, I think, found everywhere now. All of the smart contracts need to be audited, as Griff mentioned earlier. And it's, I think the Ethereum community is quite well aware of this. I think blockchain communities in general are now seeing the value of formal mechanisms for checking correctness of code. So that's one big issue. Going forward, there are still unsolved issues in the design of DAOs. So if you ask me whether or not we could do the DAO safely today, I would say no. I think there are some outstanding problems that are really, really hard. You're trying to elicit from the crowd their true feelings, and this is not easy. You can identify a set of problems you face. You can come up with one set of mechanisms to address them, and that brings its own secondary attacks that are possible. And you have to iterate this to conclusion, and hasn't been done in the research community. This is not a topic that has been ignored previously. There have been economists, there have been game theorists who've been looking at this, and the problem is unsolved, especially when the same people are both on the voter side and the beneficiary side. So today, you don't have this problem. When you run a VC fund, you don't have the same fellow sitting on the board of the VC also appearing in front of the VC with a project in his hand. You don't have that self-dealing thing. And with a DAO and in the context of a blockchain, you have it every day. And that really complicates the scenarios. So it's really a fundamentally difficult problem. The types of things that I have seen are beginning to address some of the issues, but not all. And the legality, of course, is very complicated. And I suspect it will be very difficult to solve the issues in the DAO without solving some issues related to identity on blockchains as well. So I'm looking forward to progress on those fronts before I can say, okay, we're ready to tackle DAO version 2.0. But DAO version 1.5, I'm excited about. There's still great work to be done in the meantime.
I'm really excited about, which is using CAD to start simulating some of these projects, or any simulation software. I'm just a fan of CAD because it's really nice open source stuff. And I think people are starting to agree that we can't just treat this like a website. There's been a mentality in the blockchain space that we're building. We're going to use the same ideas that we used in computer science, when really we need to understand that we're building public infrastructure that anybody can use. It's like a bridge. And if you build a crappy bridge and you don't put in the time to design it and make sure what it can withstand and watch it and monitor it to make sure it's not misused, then you're going to hurt people. And so we need to take the same approach that people have been using to build bridges and build public infrastructure that anyone can access. And that means don't write a white paper and then build $1 billion economy. It means you write a white paper and then you validate your design and you iterate and iterate for maybe years before you actually launch something to the public. You talk to smart people like Gun and you get some outside input on the potential problems with the system, and you ideally you implement escape hatches and other centralizing security features that will mitigate issues that you don't foresee.
Of you guys to tell us something that you've never told anybody else about the DAO and that experience that you had. To give you a minute to think, I think for me it was the person who shared that encrypted message with me, because we knew that was a bad address to begin with, but that kind of connected to me. For me, I was able to find sources at an exchange and link a withdrawal from that exchange through Shapeshift onto the blockchain to that address that sent the encrypted message. So that allowed me in the reporting for my book to kind of find someone associated with one of the DAO attacks. So after a lot of searching, it always bothered me that we don't know who did the DAO attack. I don't know. I just want to know the end. I want to know that side of the story, to be honest. I think it would be fascinating. It was such an elegant attack, and they really just how it happened in the open was just kind of blew my mind. But with that, I'm just open it up. What do you tell us something that you've never told anybody? Let's dish.
Is so because of the legal entanglements around fault in a situation like this, there is something that I haven't really mentioned to anyone except maybe Matt in the preparation of his book, which is the following. So everybody agrees that if a system is faulty, you can patch it. If the core EVM had a bug in it, we'd be able to patch it. There would be no controversy whatsoever. The same way when Bitcoin had its overflow bug, people patched it and nobody is really raising a ruckus about it. Somehow everyone thinks, oh, that was unintentional, therefore you can fix it. So there is a system boundary, and if the bug is on the system side, you should be able to patch it. That's great. Now the DAO bug was on the other side of the system boundary. But something that I did not make any public noise about, but kept deep within my own consciousness and informed my decisions, was this following simple fact. This bug, even though it was in user space, it stemmed from a failure of the system. It is, as an operating systems person by birth, if you would, I believe that it's the job of the system builder to document all of their interfaces, usages, and quirks. And if you fail to do so, you will end up causing bugs in user space. But the true root cause for that lies on the system side. And so therefore it was a no-brainer to me that you could do a systemic change to patch a bug like this, because you had failed to inform even a highly prominent user like the DAO, the Slockit effort, that there was a quirk here, and it led to a bug like this. So to me, I think it was not at all a violation of any contract at all, because the error stemmed from people on the system side of this, on the designer side of this, even though the bug manifested itself in application code. So, now that enough time has passed, I think it's okay to discuss this. Nobody's pointing fingers at anybody anymore. I think documentation is incredibly important, and this is also another reason why you're not going to see a reversal like the DAO again. The bug has been now communicated. The reentrancy issues with the EVM are well known. If tomorrow I write some code and it's got a reentrancy problem, I'm not going to demand an undo operation. It was entirely on me now. But back then, I don't believe it was. So it's at least part of my thinking, and I want to share it with people.
The white hat. So the Robinhood group attacked the DAO, right? But stealing money is easy. Returning money is a lot of work, and not everyone wanted to continue that work. So the Robinhood group kind of split up, and we created the white hat group, who continued kind of taking some risks with our legal world in this unknown world. And after the hard fork, we ended up with 10% of all ETC in existence. And we didn't know what to do. We weren't sure what was going to happen exactly. And so we flew off to Switzerland and talked and created a Swiss entity to protect ourselves, right? And say, it wasn't us, it's this legal fiction over here that's holding all the addresses and doing all the crazy stuff, right? And we really thought that ETC wasn't going to provide any value for anybody. So in the long run, and we didn't know how long it would take for everyone to collect their funds. So when we were able to get the ETC out, we decided that it would be best to convert it all to Ether, because that was the original currency that people put in, and that was what we would return the currency in when it got back. And so we actually spent a couple days trying to figure out how to slyly, without tanking the ETC price, to convert all of our Ether Classic into Ether. I never really told anyone about how we did this, but we created some. We worked with a really amazing dev in Switzerland. I just want to give major props to our friend. I won't say his name, but he knows who he is. And he wrote this beautiful exchange bot where we could push one button and we could sell our ETC on all exchanges at all time at one price, and bring all exchanges to the same market price. And then our plan was to actually let the price go back up a little bit and then dump it again, and just like play this yo-yo with the market, because we were the whales. But Polo ended up messing up with our plans, Poloniex at the time, and locking our funds. And that stuff is public, but no one really knew that we made all this effort to, like, we sent, there was no blockchain explorer there wasn't a good explorer for Ether Classic. So we used internal transactions to hide where the money came from on the ETC chain, make it really hard to see that it was from the DAO hack, and just kind of like we made it disappear in the EVM and then pop up and just start selling. I'll pass it to you.
Me in Switzerland with Griff. Why I didn't know about the whale part of it, but I knew about the Poloniex part of it, because I went to log into my Poloniex and immediately got my account locked because we were in the same building, and Poloniex just shut us all down. And we're all sitting there like, what's going on? They were hard after us. They were not happy with us. And I think we still have a Poloniex account that's still just like, we just never like unlocked because there was no money in it. Like, it was, God, the things we've done.
At one point, right? Like he wanted to be the ETC whale, a Bitcoin maximalist, and I'm sure part of the undercurrent of Bitcoiners that wanted to take this as an opportunity to smash Ethereum down, which is too bad because the Bitcoin community in many ways is beautiful. There's just certain people in it that want to tear people down to bring themselves up.
The stuff you're going to reveal in the book. So, especially about this attacker, we're all dying to find out how this ends.
And thank you guys for such a fascinating conversation. It's just really amazing to hear firsthand from you guys that were all there and doing this in real time. It's for sure one of the standout chapters in a wild history in crypto. And just hope everybody enjoyed this. And we're out of time, so we'll see you next time.